The horseman's body was found 3 miles from where he died. That's what happens when Mongol cavalry catches you in open ground. They don't just kill you, they obliterate you. Your horse is shot out from under you at full gallop. You hit the frozen earth at 20 miles per hour. Before you can stand, arrows rain down like sleet. You run. They follow. You're not fighting anymore, you're prey. This was Poland in December 1287. And the hunters had returned. Duke Leszek II the Black stood in the snow outside Krakow's walls, watching smoke rise from villages that had stood for 300 years. 46 years ago, the Mongols came to Poland for the first time. They killed Duke Henry II at Legnica, cut off his head, and paraded it on a lance. The knights charged. The Mongols retreated. The knights pursued, and rode straight into history's most perfect ambush. By nightfall, 9,000 Christians lay dead in a Silesian field. The Mongols left. But they remembered the route. They came back in 1259. Burned, looted, disappeared into the winter. The pattern was clear. Poland was a bank vault the Mongols could crack whenever they needed gold. Now, 1287. 30,000 Mongol warriors had crossed into Lesser Poland under 2 commanders, Talabuga Khan from the northeast, Nogai Khan from the southeast. Their strategy hadn't changed in 50 years because it didn't need to. Divide into smaller units. Move faster than news can travel. Hit wooden villages that burn in minutes. Avoid stone walls. When heavy cavalry charges, retreat. When they pursue, turn and slaughter them in the open. It was a formula perfected across 2 continents. It had conquered more territory than Rome. But something was different this time. The Mongols reached Sandomierz on December 2nd. In 1241, Sandomierz had fallen in hours. The wooden palisades went up like kindling. This time, when Nogai's advance scouts approached, they found something that shouldn't exist. Walls of stone, 3 feet thick, 20 feet high. Towers at the corners with firing positions. A garrison that didn't flee. They besieged it for days. The walls didn't crack. At Krakow, the southern capital, the Mongols expected wooden defenses like they'd burned 46 years ago. Instead, limestone fortifications, a second defensive circuit, cylindrical towers built by the best military engineers in Europe. Nogai made a choice. He did what Mongols always did when they couldn't take a fortress quickly. He bypassed it and went for the countryside. Divide the army. Plunder the open ground. Bleed Poland slowly. But then the peasants fought back. In the Podhale region, near the Tatra Mountains, local Highlanders, the Gorals, did something unprecedented. When Mongol detachments camped along the Dunajec River, expecting the usual terrified submission, the Gorals attacked the camps at night. These weren't trained soldiers. They were shepherds and farmers who'd watched their parents' generation run. They knew the mountains. They knew winter warfare. And they understood something the Mongols didn't. The old Poland was gone. Duke Leszek had spent the last 2 decades watching his kingdom transformed. After 1260, Polish kings looked at their smoldering villages and made a calculation. They couldn't outrun the Mongols. They couldn't outfight them in open battle. So they changed the game. Stone castles rose across Lesser Poland, not just royal fortresses but town walls, garrison strongholds, fortified monasteries. The old wooden defenses, built for prestige and local conflicts, were replaced with structures designed for one purpose: survival. When Nogai's forces pulled back from the Dunajec, bloodied and confused, they rode to Stary Saks, a small town in the south. Population maybe 1,000. In 1241, it wouldn't have lasted an hour. Now it had stone walls, ample food stores, and a garrison reinforced by local knights and armed peasants. The Mongols laid siege. Days passed. A week. 2 weeks. The walls held. This had never happened before. Not like this. Not town after town, fortress after fortress, refusing to break. Leszek made a decision that would end the Mongol era in Europe forever. He ran. Duke Leszek the Black rode south through mountain passes in January cold that killed men in their sleep. He wasn't fleeing. He was going for help. Behind him, his kingdom was learning a new kind of war. For 46 years, Europe had believed the Mongol formula was unstoppable. Heavy cavalry charges, the foundation of Western warfare, played directly into their hands. The Mongols wanted you to charge. That's when the feigned retreat started. That's when you died. At the Battle of Kalka River in 1223, the Mongols retreated for 9 days. The Russian princes pursued for 9 days, their formations stretching thinner each hour, cavalry units, separating to chase what looked like broken fleeing units. On the 9th day, the Mongols wheeled around and destroyed 80,000 men. At Legnica in 1241, Polish and Moravian knights charged what appeared to be a routing Mongol force. The Mongols released smoke screens to hide their movements, then flanked the knights with fresh cavalry. By the time the smoke cleared, Duke Henry II was dead and his army was meat. The pattern was mathematical. You had 2 choices: stay behind walls and watch your kingdom burn, or charge out and die heroically. Poland had chosen door number 2 twice. 50,000 dead. But in the winter of 1287–88, with Nogai Khan's 30,000-strong force rampaging through Lesser Poland, something changed in the equation. The Mongols reached Krakow on December 24th, Christmas Eve. They expected the city to fall like it had in 1241. Instead, the garrison held. Days of assault, no breach. Nogai divided his forces into smaller raiding parties, going after the villages around Krakow, the Duchy of Sieradz to the north. This was the playbook. Terrorize the countryside. Force the Duke to either watch his people suffer or ride out and fight. But here's what Nogai didn't know. Leszek had learned from the master. 3 years earlier, in 1285, King Ladislaus IV of Hungary had faced a massive Mongol invasion. The Hungarians didn't panic. They didn't charge into open ground. They used exactly what Poland was using now: stone fortresses, organized garrisons, mobile forces that struck Mongol detachments when they dispersed to plunder. Ladislaus won. The Mongols retreated. Leszek rode to the Hungarian king and asked for one thing: send me your best commander and enough troops to swing the numbers. Not to fight a pitched battle. To spring a trap. Meanwhile, in the Świętokrzyski mountains north of Krakow, the other Mongol column under Talabuga Khan was having its own problems. The Battle of Lego happened on December 20th. The historical record is sparse. We know a Polish force of unknown but significant size, under Duke Leszek, met Talabuga's column near the mountains. We know the Mongols lost. Badly. Here's what the chronicles don't say but military logic makes clear. The Poles didn't charge into open ground. They used the terrain. The Świętokrzyski mountains aren't massive peaks. They're heavily forested hills with narrow passes. Perfect for ambush. Terrible for cavalry maneuver. The Mongols needed space. They needed to see their enemy coming from a mile away. They needed room for the caracol tactic, wheeling formations of horse archers that could fire, retreat, reload, and fire again in fluid motion. In tight forest passes, that's impossible. After Lego, Talabuga's force began retreating toward their winter camp in Lviv. Not a rout. A strategic withdrawal. But here's the thing about Mongol warfare. It was built on psychological terror. You win when enemies flee before you arrive. You dominate when your reputation makes armies collapse without a fight. One defeat breaks that spell. Nogai Khan had a problem. He'd been besieging Stary Sachs for over a month. His men were hungry. The Polish countryside in January offered exactly nothing: frozen fields, empty granaries that had been cleared months ago when word of the invasion spread. The small raiding parties he'd sent to plunder were coming back bloodied, harassed by local forces sallying from fortified towns. This wasn't how it was supposed to work. The Mongol invasion strategy depended on speed and terror. You moved fast, took what you wanted, and left before the enemy could organize a response. You definitely didn't get bogged down in month-long sieges of towns with populations under 2,000. But Nogai couldn't just leave Stary Sachs unconquered. Not after Talabuga's defeat at Lego. Not when the whole point of this invasion was to remind Poland who owned them. So he committed more troops to the siege. Maybe 1,200 warriors, perhaps 1,000. The sources conflict. What matters is this. He put a significant portion of his remaining mobile force around one small fortified town. They didn't know the Hungarian army was coming. On December 24th, while Nogai's detachments probed Krakow's walls, Duke Leszek slipped out of the city with a small group of retainers. He rode through mountain passes into Hungary. The journey took days through terrain so harsh that men and horses both died from exposure. He met with King Ladislaus IV. The Hungarian king had his own reasons to hate the Mongols. They'd invaded his kingdom too, repeatedly. He agreed immediately. The Hungarian force was led by Voivode George Baksa of Sova, not a massive army, but professional cavalry, battle-hardened from the recent Mongol wars. They picked up Polish reinforcements as they moved north, local forces from the Podhale region who knew every mountain path. The Mongols at Stary Sachs had no idea they were coming. Here's the thing about Mongol military doctrine that everyone forgets. Their greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. They relied on intelligence networks, on scouts ranging 50 miles ahead of the main force, on knowing where enemy armies were before those armies knew where they were. But in January, in mountain terrain, with local populations hostile and actively hunting your scouts, that network breaks down. The Hungarian-Polish force approached Stary Sachs in mid-January 1288. The Mongols were encamped around the town, spread out for siege operations. Some units were maintaining the blockade. Others were out foraging for supplies that didn't exist. Their horses, the backbone of their mobility, were weakened from a month in winter conditions without adequate fodder. And then the Christians hit them. The Battle of Stary Sachs lasted hours, maybe less. We don't have detailed accounts because medieval chroniclers often skipped over victories they considered minor. But we know the result. The Mongol force was completely surprised and annihilated. The commander died. Of the roughly 1,000 Mongol warriors, most were killed. The survivors fled. This wasn't a feigned retreat gone wrong. This wasn't heavy cavalry charging into an ambush. This was something the Mongols had rarely experienced in 50 years of Western campaigns. They were the ones who got ambushed. Nogai Khan sat in his war tent with a choice that would define the next 2 centuries of European history. He still had most of his army, maybe 20,000 effectives, though winter and skirmishing had bled the numbers. He could regroup the dispersed detachments, march on Krakow in force, try to break the siege engines against those stone walls. Or he could look at the map and do the math. Talabuga's northern force, defeated, retreating. Stary Sachs, annihilated. Every major fortress in Lesser Poland, unconquered. The countryside, hostile, yielding minimal plunder. His supply lines, stretched to breaking across hostile territory in the worst winter in memory. And somewhere out there, a combined Hungarian-Polish army that had just wiped out 1,000 of his best warriors. The Mongol way of war was built on momentum. You won because you kept winning. Each victory fed the next. Captured supplies, terrified populations, broken enemy morale. The formula worked when you could take what you needed and move before anyone could stop you. But what happens when the wells run dry? When every town is a fortress? When the peasants fight back? When your best trick, the feigned retreat that had destroyed armies from China to Hungary, is useless because the enemy won't leave their walls? You're not conquering anymore. You're bleeding. Nogai made the only military decision that made sense. On January 22, 1288, he ordered a general withdrawal. Not a retreat, that would imply panic. A withdrawal. Organized, disciplined. The Mongol force pulled back through Polish territory, regrouped, and rode east toward their winter camps in Ruthenia. But here's the thing about withdrawals. They send a message. For 46 years, the Mongols had been able to raid Poland at will. They came when they wanted, took what they wanted, killed who they wanted, and left undefeated. They were the storm. You hid from them or you died. When Nogai's army crossed back into Ruthenia in late January, they left behind something that hadn't existed before. Proof that they could be stopped. Here's what they don't tell you about the Polish trap that defeated the Mongols in 1288. It wasn't a trap. It was something much more dangerous, evolution. For 5 decades, European commanders had tried to beat the Mongols at their own game. Heavy cavalry charges. Open field battles. The glory of personal combat. It was cultural suicide dressed up as honor. The Poles did something no Western kingdom had successfully done before. They admitted they couldn't win that way, and they changed everything. Stone fortifications. Garrison strongholds. Mobile defense forces that struck dispersed raiding parties but never accepted a pitched battle in open ground. Professional soldiers supported by armed townspeople. Supply networks that let besieged cities hold out for months. This was the 3-stage defensive plan that won the 1287–88 campaign. Stage 1. Passive defense by garrisons in fortified positions. Make every town cost time and blood. Stage 2. Local sallying forces engage small Mongol detachments. Don't fight the main army. Hit the stragglers, the foragers, the isolated units. Stage 3. Coordinate with allied forces, Hungary, to deliver a decisive counterblow against dispersed and weakened Mongol units. The Battle of Stary Sachs wasn't the victory. It was the final confirmation that the system worked. The twist isn't that the Poles were smarter than the Mongols. It's that they were patient enough to stop trying to be warriors and smart enough to start being soldiers. The real confrontation happened in a Mongol war council somewhere in Ruthenia in February 1288. Nogai Khan and Talabuga Khan met to assess the campaign. On paper, they'd achieved something. They'd raided Polish territory, taken some plunder, reminded the region that the Golden Horde still existed. But they'd failed the real objective. They hadn't taken Krakow. They hadn't taken Sandomierz. They hadn't broken the Polish ability to interfere in Ruthenian politics. They'd lost over 1,000 men at Stary Sachs, lost more at Lego, and achieved exactly none of their strategic goals. Worse, they'd proven that stone walls worked. That organized garrisons worked. That the old playbook was obsolete against enemies who'd learned to adapt. The Mongols never invaded Poland again. Think about that. the largest land empire in human history, built on military tactics that had conquered everything from Vietnam to Vienna, looked at Poland and decided it wasn't worth it. Not because Poland beat them in one glorious battle. Because Poland made victory too expensive to pursue. In 1241, Poland lost 50,000 men to Mongol invasions. In 1259–60, they lost more. They had no answer to steppe cavalry tactics except dying well. By 1288, they'd built 174 stone castles and fortified towns. They'd created professional garrison forces. They'd established supply networks that could sustain sieges. They'd forged alliances with Hungary that let them coordinate military responses. The old Poland, fractured, wooden, vulnerable, had been burned away. What rose from those ashes was something the Mongols had never fought before. A kingdom that learned. 50 years after Legnica, a Polish duke stood on the walls of Krakow and watched the Mongol army ride away. His grandfather had died charging Mongol cavalry. His father had watched villages burn and been powerless to stop it. He rebuilt those villages in stone. The Mongols didn't lose because Poland set a clever trap. They lost because Poland became a kingdom they couldn't profitably invade anymore. That's not a battle victory. That's strategic evolution. And it ended the Mongol westward expansion forever.